When it comes to talking about performance, you can't avoid talking about cash flows. And cash flows appear in the statement of cash flows. I'm not so much concerned here with how the statement of cash flows is presented, but rather with how it provides insights into performance. And what is guiding me here is the understanding that profit equals cash flow plus or minus accruals. And if we want to understand more about profit, we need to understand more about accruals. Because accruals are how we transform cash flows. We should understand that accruals are a consequence of accounting practices and accounting standards. And an overview of how accounting practices have transformed cash is fundamental to being able to understand earnings and hence the performance of the firm. The presentation of cash flows is dictated in IAS 7, and it's not the purpose of this session to go through IAS 7, but rather to highlight how it is relevant to our understanding of performance. IAS 7 is repeated in Australia as AASB 107. It requires the presentation of cash flows classified on the basis of operating activities, investing activities and financing activities, and perhaps most importantly, the reconciliations, which are probably what I want to emphasise here. First of all, if we look at the statement of cash flows, you can see that it will present cash flows calculated using either the direct or the indirect method. The direct method we can see on the slide here, and we can also see the indirect method. And the indirect method is really quite a useful device for highlighting the impact that accruals have had. So, for example, we can see that the impact that changes in receivables had in terms of adjusting cash flows through to profit, changes in inventory, other assets, revenues received in advance, etc. So what we see in this one place is a summary of the impact of all of the accounting practices which have been applied in the calculation of statutory profit. Obviously, when we see more and more accruals in the calculation of earnings, we're going to be appreciative of the fact that this is increasingly a function of accounting practices rather than cash flows, and that's going to impact our determination of the quality of earnings. And you'll often have earnings where there is a very high cash component being described as quality earnings, and earnings which are largely a function of accruals as being relatively low quality earnings. I should also mention here that we have in the cash flow statement, in addition to the operating cash flows, we also have cash flows from investing activities. And in combination, operating cash flows and investing cash flows give us probably what the finance people would almost describe as a free cash flow number. There are some adjustments needed. For example, we are still somewhat equivocal as to how we present interest paid, but that's a relatively close approximation. Another important reconciliation in the cash flow statement is the reconciliation of cash and cash equivalents in the cash flow statement to cash and cash equivalents in the balance sheet. This basically shows us how the statements articulate, and that's quite fundamental to be able to understand how the three statements join up to each other. Hence why I think of the three statements as being a There are extensive disclosure requirements, although I'll probably not refer to these here, and I'll defer that to our consideration of cash flow statements more generally. Thank you.